At my husband's funeral, 300 people came to say goodbye. I called our 5 daughters to tell them their father had passed. Not one of them asked, "Mom, are you okay?" All 5 asked the same question, "When's the will reading?" I hung up, sat alone in the empty house, and stared at the 25 sealed envelopes my husband had left behind. 25 days later, the first envelope was opened. That's when everything changed. Thank you for being here and taking a moment to listen. Before we continue, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. It helps create connection around this story. Please keep in mind that this story contains dramatized and fictional elements created for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals is coincidental. I stood alone at my husband's funeral. 300 people came, but the 5 who should have been standing beside me, they were late. The chapel was full, every pew packed. Former students of Harrison's, some in their 50s now, colleagues from the high school where he'd taught American history for 40 years, neighbors from downtown Asheville, friends from the Rotary Club, the Tuesday Coffee Group. They came because they loved him. A man in his 60s approached me, eyes wet. I was in his class in 1987, failing, ready to drop out. He stayed after school with me every Thursday for 6 months. I'm a principal now because of him. A woman in her 40s mascara smudged. He wrote my college recommendation when no one else would. I'm a doctor now. 300 people, 300 stories. Then 20 minutes into the service, the side door opened. My daughters walked in. Naomi first, 43 CEO from New York, black designer dress heels clicking, sat in the second row. Didn't look at me. Rosalind, 40 lawyer from Chicago, black pantsuit, blonde hair, tight, no eye contact. Celeste, 38 doctor from Seattle, professional, distant. Violet, 36 designer from Austin, sunglasses still on indoors. Aurelia, 34, called herself an artist in Portland, though I hadn't seen her paint in years. Black sweater jeans, hair messy. They didn't hug me, didn't sit beside me where family belonged. They sat behind me, like strangers. The minister spoke about Harrison's 40 years of teaching, his dedication, our 52-year marriage. He asked if anyone wanted to share a memory. 10 people stood, students, colleagues, neighbors. Not one of my daughters. They sat silent. Naomi checked her phone twice. Violet adjusted her sunglasses. Celeste stared ahead. Rosalind crossed her legs. Aurelia looked uncomfortable. They didn't cry, not once. After the service, there was a reception. Coffee pastries, quiet conversations. I accepted condolences near the door. My daughters gathered by the coffee station, not talking about their father, just glancing at watches, impatient. Finally, Naomi walked over. The others followed. "Mom," she said, businesslike. "When are we reading the will? Not how are you not, we're sorry. Just, when are we reading the will?" I looked at them, blank faces. Waiting. 4 days, I said quietly. "Warren Ashford will handle it, downtown." "We'll be there," Naomi said. They left 10 minutes later, all 5. Didn't stay, didn't help. Just walked out, got in their rental cars, drove away. I stayed until the last person left, until the hall was empty. Then I walked outside into the cool October evening to the cemetery behind the chapel. Harrison's grave was still open. Casket lowered dirt, not filled. I stood at the edge, looking down. In my coat pocket, the envelope. The first one. Letter number 1 of 25. Harrison had written them 6 weeks ago when he knew he was dying. Sealed each one, numbered them, gave them to Warren with strict instructions. Don't open them until after the funeral. Make sure all 5 are there. I pulled it out, held it. Heavier than expected. I thought about what Harrison said 6 weeks ago in the hospital. Weak, barely sitting up, but voice clear. "When I die, they won't cry. They'll just ask how much they're getting." I'd wanted to argue, tell him he was wrong, that our daughters loved him. But I couldn't, because I knew he was right. I looked at the envelope, at the number 1 in Harrison's handwriting. "This is where it begins," I whispered. Then I turned and walked back to my car. 6 weeks before the funeral, I sat beside my husband's hospital bed. The doctor had just left. 4 to 6 weeks, he'd said. Maybe less. My husband looked at me. His face was calm, too calm. I need you to do something for me, he said. Anything. I need you to help me write letters. I stared at him. Letters. 25 of them, he said. One for each night, for our daughters. I didn't understand. Why, because they won't come, he said quietly. Not to see me. They'll come for the money, and I need them to hear the truth before I'm gone. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't, because he was right. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked on the letters together. He wrote at the dining table. I sat beside him. Sometimes he wrote for hours. Sometimes he could only manage a few sentences before the pain became too much. What are you writing now? I asked one night. He paused, looked at the envelope in front of him. Number 18, he said, for Rosalind. I felt my chest tighten. What are you going to say? He set down his pen, pulled a piece of paper from the drawer, a letter, crumpled, threatening. She owes $800,000, he said quietly. I stared at the letter. It was from a creditor. The language was harsh. Legal threats, demands for payment. When did you get this? I asked. 2 months ago, she sent it to me, asked if I could help. And did you? I couldn't, he said. We don't have that kind of money, not without selling the house. He picked up his pen again, started writing. She's desperate, he said. And when desperate people see money within reach, they do desperate things. I looked at him. You think she'd... I don't know, he said, but I need to warn her before it's too late. By the 4th week, we had 15 letters. My husband had written them all himself, but his hands were getting weaker. The tremors were worse. I can't finish them, he said one night, staring at the blank envelopes. Then I will, I said. He looked at me. Are you sure? You tell me what to write, I'll write it. So that's what we did. For the next 10 days, he dictated. I wrote, letter 16, 17, 18, 19. Some nights he coughed so hard he couldn't speak, but he never stopped. Letter 25, he said on the last night. This one's for all of them. What do you want to say? He thought for a long time. Then he smiled, just a little. Tell them forgiveness isn't free. It has to be earned, through action, not words. I wrote it down, sealed the envelope. 25 letters, 25 truths. The next day, we called our lawyer. Warren came to the house. He was 67, gray-haired, and had handled our family's legal matters for 20 years. You want to change the estate plan? Warren asked. Yes, my husband said. I want to establish a revocable living trust. Warren opened his briefcase. Smart. A trust bypasses probate entirely. North Carolina probate can take 9 to 12 months. With a trust, assets can be distributed immediately once conditions are met. Exactly, my husband said. I want to place $6.75 million into the trust, the daughter's inheritance, with specific conditions. Warren pulled out his notepad. What conditions? My husband explained. 25 nights, 25 letters, all 5 daughters under one roof. If they stayed, they'd each receive $1 million immediately from the trust. If even one left, the entire amount would go to the Asheville Community Foundation. Warren stared at him. You're serious? Completely. And upon your passing, the trust becomes irrevocable, meaning no one can change the terms. Your wife will serve as successor trustee with authority to distribute funds once the conditions are satisfied. Yes, my husband said. Warren looked at me. You understand what this means. You'll be responsible for enforcing these conditions, for deciding whether they've met the requirements. I understand, I said. Warren sighed. All right, I'll draft the trust documents. We'll need to fund the trust, transfer the assets into the trust's name before you pass. That's critical. If the assets aren't in the trust, they'll go through probate. How long will it take? My husband asked. 1 week to draft, another week to transfer assets. We should start immediately. We spent the next 2 weeks working with Warren. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, stocks, bonds. Everything designated for the daughters was transferred into the trust. The house and the cabin stayed in our joint names. Those would pass directly to me as surviving spouse. No probate needed. The trust was fully funded 3 days before my husband died. 4 days after the funeral, I stood in my living room holding the stack of 25 envelopes. I hadn't opened any of them. My husband had told me not to, not until the daughters were all together. I picked up my phone. It was time to call my daughters. But before I made that call, I needed to remember why. During those 6 weeks, our daughters visited 5 times. I counted. Visit 1, Naomi. She flew in from New York on a Tuesday, stayed 2 hours, sat in the living room talking about work the entire time, her tech company, a merger, board problems. She didn't ask how her father was feeling, didn't ask if he was in pain. When I suggested she go upstairs, she stood in his doorway for 3 minutes. "Hi, Dad, how are you?" Didn't wait for an answer. "I have a Zoom call in 20 minutes, she said. "I should go." She left, didn't hug me goodbye. Visit 2, Rosalind. She drove from Chicago the following week, brought her laptop, set it up on the dining table, and worked the entire time. I sat in the living room listening to her type. Click, click, click. After an hour, I asked, "Don't you want to see your father?" "I'm busy, Mom. I can't stay long." She never went upstairs. After 90 minutes, she packed up and left. Visit 3, Celeste. She flew in from Seattle. She's a doctor, so she examined him. Went straight to his bedroom. Checked his pulse, listened to his breathing, looked at his medication list. Spoke to him like a patient, not her father. "Your vitals are stable. The hospice nurse is doing a good job." Didn't sit with him, didn't hold his hand, didn't say "I love you." After 90 minutes, she came downstairs. "He's comfortable. That's all we can hope for." Then she left to catch her flight. Visit 4, Violet. She drove up from Austin, brought an interior design catalog. We sat in the kitchen. She flipped through pages showing me color swatches. "Mom," she said casual, "when he passes, can I redecorate the house? The living room could really use an update." I stared at her. "What?" she said. I didn't answer, got up and walked out. She left an hour later. Visit 5, Aurelia. She arrived from Portland 3 hours late. I smelled the wine when she walked in. "Sorry, traffic." "There's no traffic between Portland and Asheville, just a flight." She went upstairs, sat beside his bed. Within 10 minutes, she was asleep in the chair. I let her sleep for an hour, then woke her. "You should go." She nodded. On her way out, she hugged me. "Mom, I'm doing really well. I have a gallery show in New York next month." I knew it wasn't true. There was no gallery show. There hadn't been one in 3 years. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said. She left. Harrison didn't say much during any of the visits. He lay in bed, watched them come and go, stayed quiet. After Aurelia left, I went upstairs. Harrison was awake, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of the bed. "You were right," he whispered. "They don't care." I took his hand. "Then we'll make them care," I said. He looked at me, tired eyes but determined. "You really think the letters will work?" "I don't know, but we have to try." He nodded, closed his eyes. That was 6 weeks ago. Now, 4 days after the funeral, I sat in the living room with my phone in my hand. I started dialing. Naomi first. She answered on the second ring. "Mom." 4 days from now, Warren's office, downtown, 10 a.m. "What's this about?" "Your father's will." Silence, then "I'll be there." I called Rosalind, Celeste, Violet, Aurelia. All 5 said the same thing. "I'll be there." Of course they would. They wanted to know how much they were getting. I hung up and set the phone down. 4 days to prepare. I looked at the stack of 25 envelopes on the dining table. "Let's see if they care now," I whispered. But there was one more night I needed to remember, the night he left. Harrison passed at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was the only one there. The bedroom was dark except for the small lamp on the nightstand. Soft yellow light, just enough to see his face. He was lying in our bed, the same bed we'd shared for 52 years. I sat beside him in the chair I'd pulled up 3 weeks earlier. I hadn't moved it since. His breathing had been shallow for hours, in and out, in and out. Each breath slower than the last. I held his hand. It was cold. I didn't call our daughters. Even if I had, they wouldn't have made it in time. Naomi was in New York, Rosalind in Chicago, Celeste in Seattle, Violet in Austin, Aurelia in Portland. By the time any of them booked a flight, it would be over. So I sat alone. Around 2:30, his breathing changed. Slower, longer pauses between each breath. I leaned forward. "Harrison," I whispered. His eyes opened, just barely. He looked at me. "Did you finish the letters?" he asked. His voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear him. "Yes," I said. "Will it work?" I didn't know how to answer, so I told him the truth. "I don't know." He nodded just a little. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. Promise me you'll try." I squeezed his hand. "I promise." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, just a small one, barely there. But it was enough. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too." He closed his eyes, and then at 2:47 he took one last breath and stopped. I sat there for a long time, 20 minutes maybe. I didn't move, didn't cry, just sat there holding his hand, watching his chest, waiting to see if maybe he'd breathe again. He didn't. I wasn't crying, not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't have time to grieve. I had work to do. At 3:10, I let go of his hand, stood up, walked downstairs to the kitchen, picked up the phone. I called the doctor first. The hospice nurse had told me to call when it happened. The doctor arrived 30 minutes later, checked Harrison signed the paperwork. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. I nodded, didn't say anything. Next, I called the funeral home. They said they'd send someone in the morning. Then I called Warren Ashford. "It's Vivian," I said when he answered. "He's gone." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll start the arrangements. The reading is in 4 days." "Yes." "I'll make sure everything is ready." "Thank you." I hung up. By 6 in the morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The house was silent, empty. I picked up the phone one more time. I called Naomi first. She answered on the third ring. "Mom, it's 6 in the morning. Your father passed this morning," I said. Silence. Then, "When's the will reading?" Not, "I'm sorry," not, "Are you okay?" Just, "When's the will reading?" 4 days, I said. "I'll send you the details." I hung up. I called Rosalind next. "When's the funeral?" she asked. "Celeste, what was the cause?" Violet cried, but I could hear the TV in the background. She wasn't even paying attention. Aurelia didn't answer. I left a voicemail. When I finished, I set the phone down and sat there in the kitchen as the sun came up. I looked at the dining table. The 25 envelopes were stacked there exactly where Harrison and I had left them. I walked over, picked up the first one, held it in my hands. "Now it begins," I whispered. 4 days after the funeral, I stood in Warren's office downtown. The building was old brick, 3 floors, with a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains from the conference room windows. My 5 daughters sat around the long table: Naomi, Rosalind, Celeste, Violet, Aurelia. They'd all flown in. New York, Chicago, Seattle, Austin, Portland. None of them had asked how I was doing. They'd only asked, "When's the meeting?" Warren stood at the head of the table, gray suit, briefcase open. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm here to explain the terms of your father's estate plan, specifically the revocable living trust he established 6 weeks before he passed." Naomi frowned. "A trust, not a will." "There is a will," Warren said, "but it's what we call a pour-over will. It simply states that any assets not already in the trust go into it after death. However, your father transferred all designated assets into the trust before he passed, so there's nothing left to go through probate." "What's the difference?" Celeste asked. "Probate is a court process," Warren explained. "In North Carolina, it takes 9 to 12 months minimum. The court supervises asset distribution creditors file claims, and everything is public record. A trust bypasses all of that. It's private, and it allows for immediate distribution once conditions are met." He pulled out a blue binder, opened it. "Your father's trust contains $6.75 million designated for the 5 of you, $1.35 million per daughter." The room went still. Rosalind leaned forward. "When do we get it?" "That depends," Warren said. "Upon your father's death, this revocable trust became irrevocable, meaning the terms cannot be changed by anyone including your mother or myself. We are legally bound to follow your father's instructions exactly as written." He read from the document. "The 5 daughters must stay together at the family home in Asheville for 25 consecutive nights. Each night, one letter written by your father will be read aloud. If all 5 daughters complete the 25 nights, the trust will immediately distribute $1 million to each daughter on the morning of day 26. Naomi blinked. $1 million immediately. "Yes," Warren said, "as the trust attorney and your mother as trustee. We have the legal authority to release those funds without court approval, without waiting for probate. without any bureaucratic delays. The moment the conditions are satisfied, the wire transfers can be initiated. You could have the money in your accounts within 48 hours. Violet sat forward. Wait, you said $1 million each, but we're supposed to get $1.35 million. Correct, Warren said. The remaining $350,000 per daughter, along with the family home and the Blue Ridge cabin, will be distributed after your mother passes. Those assets will remain in the trust until that time. Celeste crossed her arms. And if we don't stay, what if someone has to leave? Warren's face was grave. If even one daughter leaves before the 25 nights are complete, for any reason the entire $6.75 million will be transferred to the Asheville Community Foundation. None of you will receive anything, not $1. Silence. Rosalind's face went pale. You're saying if one person quits, we all lose everything. That's exactly what I'm saying, Warren said. This is an all-or-nothing condition, and as trustee, your mother is legally obligated to enforce it. She has no discretion to bend the rules or make exceptions. He looked at me. I nodded. The trust document is ironclad, Warren continued. Your father worked with me to ensure there are no loopholes. 25 consecutive nights, all 5 daughters, or the entire inheritance goes to charity. Aurelia spoke quietly. What if there's an emergency? The trust terms make no exceptions for emergencies, Warren said. I advised your father against this, but he was adamant. Naomi looked at me. Mom, did you agree to this? Yes, I said. And you'll actually enforce it. You'd let us lose everything. I don't have a choice, I said. The trust is irrevocable. I'm legally bound to follow your father's instructions. Rosalind stood. This is manipulation. It's the law, Warren said flatly. He handed each daughter a copy of the trust document. You have 24 hours to decide. If you agree, the first reading will take place tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at the family home. If any of you choose not to participate, I'll begin the process of transferring the funds to the foundation. One by one, they took the papers and left. I stayed behind. Warren closed his briefcase. Are you sure about this? No, I said, but my husband was. Warren nodded. I walked out, watched my daughters drive away. 24 hours. Let's see if they show up. Day 1, 7 p.m. All 5 of them sitting in the living room waiting. They came back. Not because they wanted to hear what their father had to say, but because they couldn't afford to lose $1 million. I sat in the armchair by the window watching. They were on the couch, Naomi on one end, Rosalind beside her, then Celeste, Violet, Aurelia on the other end. Not touching, not looking at each other, just sitting there in silence. The house felt different with them in it, heavier. At 7 exactly, there was a knock at the door. I stood up, opened it. Warren. He was holding a black leather briefcase. He stepped inside, nodded at me, then walked into the living room. Good evening, he said to my daughters. Nobody answered. Warren set the briefcase on the coffee table, opened it, pulled out the first envelope. Envelope number 1. He looked at me. I nodded. Warren opened it carefully, pulled out a single sheet of paper, began to read. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're here because you want money, not because you loved me. I know that. Your mother knows that. But I'm giving you one last chance. 25 letters, 25 truths. If you can read them all, maybe you'll change. Maybe you won't. But at least I tried. Dad. Warren folded the letter, set it on the table. Silence. I watched my daughters, watched their faces. Naomi's eyes were wet. She wiped at them quickly. But I knew better. Those weren't real tears. Rosalind stared at the floor, face blank, cold. Celeste stood up suddenly. I need some air. She walked to the window, stood there with her arms crossed, staring out at the street. Violet looked at me. Mom, are you okay? I'm fine, I said. Aurelia didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there staring at the coffee table. Warren closed his briefcase, stood up. I'll be back tomorrow night, he said. Same time. He left. I walked him to the door, closed it behind him. When I came back to the living room, my daughters were still sitting there. Nobody had moved. I stood in the doorway looking at them. There's food in the kitchen, I said. Your old rooms are upstairs. Good night. I turned and walked up the stairs. Behind me, I heard one of them, Naomi, I think, say something quietly. Then Rosalind's voice. then Celeste's. I stopped at the top of the stairs, listened. I couldn't make out the words, just voices, low, tense. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed. One night down, 24 to go. I waited there for a few minutes listening. The house was old, sound carried. I could hear them talking downstairs. Not the words, just the murmur of voices. Then I stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the driveway. All 5 cars were still there. Naomi's rental, Rosalind's SUV, Celeste's sedan, Violet's convertible, Aurelia's beat-up Honda. They hadn't left. I looked at the living room window. The light was still on. I could see shadows moving. What are they saying, I wondered. Are they planning to leave? Are they already trying to figure out a way around the rules? I didn't know. But I knew this tomorrow night there would be another letter, and the night after that, another. And each one would be harder than the last. Harrison had been careful, deliberate. The first letter was gentle, almost kind, but the rest they wouldn't be. I turned away from the window, lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling. One night down, I thought again. 24 to go. Over the next 4 nights, something shifted. The letters became softer, gentler. Harrison wasn't attacking them. He was reminding them of who they used to be. Night 2. Letter for Naomi. Warren read Harrison's words about the day Naomi turned 8. She told him she wanted to be a scientist who'd cure cancer. You said you'd save people, Warren read. What happened to that dream? I watched from my chair by the window. Naomi was crying, real tears this time. I forgot, she whispered. Night 3. Letter for Rosalind. When she was 10, a boy at school was being bullied. Rosalind had stepped in, defended him. Got hurt, but the boy went home safe. You used to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves, Warren read. Rosalind didn't speak, but her hands were shaking. Night 4, letter for Celeste. At 6 years old, she'd found an injured bird in the backyard. Harrison told her it probably wouldn't survive, but Celeste didn't give up. She kept that bird in a shoebox for 2 months, fed it with an eyedropper, wrapped its wing carefully. You used to care, Warren read. Celeste stood and walked out. I heard her crying in the kitchen. Night 5, letter for Aurelia. Harrison wrote about the Asheville Animal Shelter. When Aurelia was 12, she'd volunteered every Saturday for 2 years. Cleaned cages, walked dogs, sat with the old cats nobody wanted. You didn't do it for credit, Warren read. You did it because you cared. That's the daughter I want back. Aurelia broke. She sobbed, covering her face. Naomi put an arm around her. It's okay. It's not okay, Aurelia said, her voice raw. I've been lying. There's no gallery show. There never was. I haven't painted anything in 3 years. Rosalind looked at her. Why didn't you tell us? Because I was ashamed. Nobody spoke. Night 6, letter for Violet. When she was 14, she'd entered a design competition for a local charity. They needed a new community center. Violet drew plans, simple, functional, beautiful. She won. The charity used her design. You used to create things that helped people. Warren read. Not just things that looked expensive. Violet didn't cry. She just stared at the floor. After Warren left that night, something changed. My daughters didn't go upstairs. They stayed in the living room. And for the first time in years, they talked to each other. Not about work, not about money, about the letters, about the memories. I stood at the top of the stairs listening. Do you remember that bird? Naomi asked Celeste. Yeah, Celeste said quietly. It flew away after 2 months. I cried for a week. You were always like that, Rosalind said. You cared too much. I used to, Celeste said. Silence. Then Violet, do you think Dad was right? Do you think we've changed that much? Nobody answered. I watched them from the stairs. Naomi had her arm around Aurelia. Rosalind leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Celeste sat on the arm of the couch. For a moment, they looked like they used to. Before the money. Before the careers. Before the distance. Maybe Harrison was right, I thought. Maybe there's still hope. But then I saw the stack of envelopes on the coffee table. 19 left. The first 6 letters had been gentle, reminders of who they used to be. But I knew what was coming next. The hard part. The truths they didn't want to hear. I walked back to my bedroom. 1 more week of peace, I whispered. Then it gets ugly. The tears didn't last. By letter 6, the warmth was gone. Now came the shame. Harrison's next letters weren't gentle. They were surgical, each one cut deep. Letter 6, for Naomi. 2 years ago, she'd let go of 200 employees. Not in person, over email. A single message sent at 5 p.m. on a Friday. You didn't even look them in the eye, Warren read. Naomi's face went pale. The company was struggling, or just not making enough money, Rosalind said. Letter 7, for Rosalind. She owed $800,000. Gambling debts, Chicago, Atlantic City, Las Vegas. She'd borrowed from dangerous people who'd started calling, threatening. You were planning to use your inheritance to run You Are in Red. Rosalind didn't deny it. Letter 8, for Celeste. 3 years ago, a patient came in critical heart issue, but Celeste had tickets to a gala. She handed the case to a resident. The patient nearly didn't make it. You chose a party over a life, Warren read. Celeste stood. The patient survived. Barely, I said quietly. She sat back down. Letter 9, for Violet. An elderly woman hired Violet to redesign her home. Paid $50,000 up front. Violet took the money, never finished the project, just disappeared. You took from someone who couldn't fight back. Warren read. Violet's face flushed. She was rude. She was 83, Naomi said sharply. They started turning on each other then. Blaming, deflecting. At least I didn't abandon a patient, Violet snapped. At least I didn't steal, Celeste shot back. At least I didn't destroy 200 families, Rosalind said. I stood. Enough. They stopped, looked at me. Your father didn't write these letters to make you fight, I said. He wrote them to make you see. So sit down and listen. Nobody argued. Night 10, letter 10. This one was about Harrison. Warren read slowly. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. The doctor said maybe 10 years, maybe less. I didn't tell your mother. I didn't tell any of you. I wanted you to live your lives without worrying about me. But you didn't live. You wasted your lives on things that don't matter, and now I'm gone. And you're here because you want money. Not because you loved me. That's my greatest failure. Not the heart condition. You. Silence. Naomi looked at me. Mom, did you know? No, I said. He never told me. Her face crumpled. I felt anger and grief twist together. Harrison had carried that alone for 5 years. 5 years of knowing. And he'd never said a word. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to hold him. But he was gone. After that night, nobody spoke. Warren left. My daughters sat in silence, Naomi staring at the floor, Rosalind with arms crossed, Celeste with her head in her hands. I stood, walked to the stairs. Good night, I said. Nobody answered. I went upstairs, sat on my bed, stared at the wall. Halfway through, I thought, 15 letters left. Can they survive the rest? By night 11, something had changed. They weren't arguing anymore. They were listening. The next few letters were different, softer. Not about who my daughters used to be, about who we used to be, together. Letter 11. Christmas, when Naomi was 10. We'd driven to the Blue Ridge cabin. It snowed. The girls built a snowman. Harrison made hot chocolate. We sat by the fire until midnight. I don't want you to remember me as the father who judged you. Warren read, I want you to remember the father who loved you. Naomi was crying, real tears. Letter 12. A beach trip. Rosalind was 15. Outer Banks. Harrison took her fishing at dawn. She caught a flounder, biggest one that week. You smiled that morning, Warren read. I hadn't seen you smile in months. That's the daughter I want back. Rosalind covered her face. Letter 13. Celeste's 8th birthday. The aquarium. She'd stood in front of the jellyfish tank for an hour. Harrison bought her a stuffed jellyfish. She slept with it for 2 years. Celeste was crying quietly. Letter 14. Violet's high school graduation. She gave a speech. Harrison gripped my hand the entire time. When she finished, he stood and clapped louder than anyone. Violet wiped her eyes. Then came letter 15. This one was longer, about Harrison's father, Grandpa Joe. When my father passed, Warren read 300 people came to his funeral. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He was a high school history teacher, but for 40 years he taught. He coached. He stayed after school to tutor kids who were failing. I remembered that funeral. I'd stood beside Harrison watching him cry as former students told him what Joe had meant to them. One man stood up and said, "Mr. Harrison taught me I wasn't stupid. I'm a college professor now because of him." I sat there watching, and I thought, what will my funeral look like? The room was silent. Will 300 people come or just 5? And if only 5 come, will it be because you loved me or because you're waiting to hear how much you'll inherit? Naomi broke, put her face in her hands and sobbed. "I don't even know the names of my employees," she said. "I fired 200 people and I don't know their names." Celeste shook her head. "I can't remember the last time I actually sat with a patient. Really sat. Not just prescribed pills and left." Rosalind stared at the floor. Violet said quietly, "I didn't even go to Grandpa Joe's funeral. I had a client meeting." Aurelia didn't say anything, just cried. After Warren left, something shifted. My daughters didn't go upstairs. They stayed in the living room. Then Naomi got up, walked to the dining table, sat down. One by one, the others followed. They started talking about memories, about Dad, about Grandpa Joe, about Christmas at the cabin, the beach trip, the aquarium. I stood in the doorway watching. Celeste looked up. "Mom, do you remember that snowman?" I nodded. "Your father put a carrot nose on it. A crow stole it the next morning." They laughed, quiet, sad laughs. "Rosalind, I still have that flounder picture." "Violet, I wish I'd gone to Grandpa Joe's funeral." Naomi looked at me. "Mom, will you sit with us?" I hesitated, then walked over, sat down. For the first time in years, we sat together, as a family. We talked until midnight. When I finally went upstairs, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I wanted to believe they were changing. I wanted to believe the letters were working. But I knew the truth. The worst letter was still coming. Letter 18. The one about Rosalind. The one Harrison and I had written together. The one that would change everything. 10 more nights, I thought. Then she'll know that I know. I wasn't looking for trouble that night. Just aspirin for a headache. It was night 16. The reading had ended an hour ago. My daughters had gone upstairs. The house was quiet. I walked down the hallway looking for the medicine cabinet. That's when I saw it. Rosalind's door was open, just a crack, light spilling out into the dark hallway. I stopped. I should have kept walking, should have gone to bed, but something made me look inside. Her laptop sat on the bed, screen glowing. She wasn't in the room. I stepped inside. The screen was covered in browser tabs, 8 of them, all open at once. I leaned closer. Tab 1, life insurance payout timeline after death. Tab 2, accidental death versus natural death inheritance laws. Tab 3, how long does probate take in North Carolina? Tab 4, estate distribution after accidental death of parent. Tab 5, how to challenge a will in North Carolina. My hands started shaking. I clicked on the next tab, an email dated 2 weeks ago. From R. Sullivan Private Investigations to Rosalind Subject Surveillance Report Week 1. I read it slowly. Target follows a predictable routine. Takes sleeping medication at 11 p.m. nightly. Prescription bottle located in upstairs bathroom. House features a steep staircase with no railing on the upper landing. High risk for accidental fall, especially under influence of medication. Recommend monitoring for opportunity. I felt cold all over. I scrolled down, found another email. From Rosalind to R. Sullivan. Subject, RE Surveillance Report. How much for another week of monitoring? I need to know her exact schedule before I make any decisions. I backed away from the laptop, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. She was planning to harm me, to make it look like an accident, to get the inheritance faster. I stood in that room for a long time staring at the screen. I thought about calling the police, telling my other daughters, sending Rosalind away right now. But then I remembered something 6 weeks ago. My husband sitting at the dining table, writing letter 18. She owes $800,000, he'd said. And when desperate people see money within reach, they do desperate things. He hadn't known about the private investigator. He hadn't known about the emails or the browser tabs, but he'd known her desperation, her debt, and he'd feared this might happen. That's why he wrote letter 18, not as proof, as a warning. Don't stop her, he'd told me. Let her read letter 18. Let her see that I knew, that I was afraid, and let her choose. I closed the laptop, walked out of the room. My hands were still shaking. I went downstairs, sat in the living room, stared at the coffee table. 9 envelopes left. Letter 17 tomorrow night, letter 18 the night after that. 2 more nights. 2 more nights and Rosalind would hear her father's words. I know you're drowning, and I'm afraid of what you might do, but I'm begging you don't do it. Don't lose yourself. Would it be enough? Would she stop? I didn't know, but my husband had believed she could still be saved, so I'd wait. 2 more nights. I went upstairs, past Rosalind's room. The door was still open, the laptop still glowing. I didn't go inside. I went to my own room, locked the door, checked the lock twice. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. Was I gambling with my own life, maybe? But it was the only way to know if she could still be saved. I thought about the sleeping pills in my bathroom, the steep staircase, the way Rosalind had looked at me tonight during the reading. Cold, calculating. I stood, walked to the bathroom, took the bottle of sleeping pills and locked them in the drawer beside my bed. Then I moved a chair in front of my bedroom door. Just in case. 2 more nights, I thought, as I lay down in the dark. Then she'll know that I know. And I'll find out if my husband was right to believe in her, or if I should have called the police tonight. If you're still here, I want to pause for just a moment. At this point in the story, I genuinely want to know how this situation feels to you. If you were in my place, would you confront the truth head on, or stay silent and wait? Share your perspective in the comments. Let's talk about it together before what happens next. And just so you know, the following part of this story includes dramatized and fictional elements that may not reflect real events. If this isn't something you wish to continue with, you're free to stop watching here. Night 18, 7 o'clock. All 5 daughters sat in the living room. I sat in my chair by the window watching Rosalind. She looked calm, too calm. Warren stood by the fireplace holding envelope 18. He looked at me. I nodded. He opened the envelope and began to read. Rosalind, I'm writing this because I know you're drowning. I saw the letters from the creditors. $800,000. The threats. I know they're coming for you. And I know you, Rosalind. Better than you think. When people are desperate, when they're cornered with no way out, they start looking at things that don't belong to them. They start seeing other people's lives as obstacles. I'm afraid that when you learn about the conditions of this trust, the 25 nights you'll have to wait, you'll start thinking of darker ways to speed up the process. I don't know what you'll do. I don't know if you'll actually go through with it. But I'm begging you don't. Don't become the kind of person who harms others just because of numbers on paper. Your mother loves you more than her own life. But if you take her life to get what you want, you won't just lose her. You'll lose yourself. Prove that my worst fear about you is wrong. Dad. Warren set the letter down. Silence. Rosalind's face had gone white. Her hands were shaking. Naomi stared at her. What is he talking about? Celeste leaned forward. 800,000? You owe that much? It's none of your business, Rosalind said quietly. It is our business, Violet said. I stood up, walked to the coffee table, picked up the folder, set it down in front of Rosalind. Open it, I said. Her hands shook as she opened the folder. Inside screenshots of 8 browser tabs. Life insurance payout timeline, accidental death inheritance laws, probate duration in North Carolina, the emails from R. Sullivan Private Investigations, the payment receipt, the surveillance report detailing my routine, my sleeping pills, the steep staircase. Her face went gray. Your father was right to be afraid, I said quietly. Naomi grabbed the folder, read the pages. Her face twisted with shock. You hired someone to watch Mom. I wasn't going to do it, Rosalind said, tears streaming. I swear I was desperate. You were planning ways to make it look like an accident, Celeste said coldly. I wasn't going to go through with it, Rosalind sobbed. Rosalind covered her face. I hate myself. I hate who I've become. I looked at my daughter, the woman who'd once fought bullies to protect strangers. Your father gave you a chance, I said softly. Rosalind looked up, face wet with tears. He didn't know the details, I said. He didn't know you'd hire an investigator, but he knew you. He knew your desperation, and he feared this might happen. He saw through me, Rosalind whispered, even before I did it. Yes, I said. Naomi stood. Mom, you can't let her stay. I looked at each of them, at my 4 daughters who were afraid not for my life, but for their inheritance. Then I looked at Rosalind. You can stay, I said, my voice cold, steady. Naomi's eyes went wide. Mom, I held up my hand. But from this moment until night 25, you will move into the bedroom directly across from mine. My bedroom door will remain locked at all times. Warren will hold your passport, your driver's license, and any other identification you have. Rosalind stared at me. If you leave this house, even to step onto the front porch, the trust will be closed immediately and all of you will lose everything. I stepped closer. If I feel unsafe, for even a moment, the trust closes. If you make any attempt to access my room, the trust closes. If you contact anyone outside this house without my permission, the trust closes. I paused. You're not staying because I pity you. You're staying because your father bet my life on the chance that you still have a soul worth saving. So prove it. Warren cleared his throat. I'll need your identification now. Rosalind's hands shook as she pulled her wallet from her purse, handed her driver's license to Warren, then her passport. Warren placed them in his briefcase. I'll hold these until the trust conditions are satisfied or violated. Rosalind nodded. I turned to my other daughters. If any of you are uncomfortable with this arrangement, you're free to leave. But if you leave, all of you forfeit the inheritance. None of them moved. Good. Rosalind, move your things to the upstairs guest room across from mine tonight. Warren will stay until you're settled. Rosalind stood slowly. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't want your apology, I said. I want 7 more nights of proof that your father wasn't wrong about you. She nodded and walked upstairs. The other 4 daughters sat in stunned silence. I looked at Warren. You'll come back tomorrow night. Yes. I walked upstairs, locked my bedroom door, checked the lock twice. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and exhaled. 7 more nights. 7 more nights of sleeping with a chair against my door. 7 more nights of gambling with my life. But my husband had believed she could be saved. And I had to try. I didn't expect the knocking. It came at 2 in the morning, soft but insistent, pulling me out of a sleep I hadn't earned. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and stared at the door. Mom. Rosalind's voice. I didn't move. I wasn't sure I wanted to open that door. Downstairs earlier that night, I'd watched her face when Warren read letter 18. I'd seen the shock, the denial, the tears. I'd also seen the truth. She knocked again. Mom, please. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. She stood in the hallway in wrinkled clothes, her eyes red and swollen. She looked exhausted, broken. For a moment, I saw the 10-year-old who'd once fought a bully twice her size to protect a friend. Can I come in? She whispered. I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. I stayed near the door, arms crossed, waiting. I'm sorry, she said finally. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't respond. I never thought I'd actually do it. She continued, voice shaking. I was looking. I was desperate. The debt. They threatened my life. I didn't know what else to do. So you decided to harm me instead, I said quietly. She flinched. I wasn't going to actually. You hired someone to follow me. You researched how long it would take for the insurance to pay out. You looked up how to make it look like an accident. Her face crumpled. I know how it sounds, but I swear I never would have gone through with it. I needed to know if there was a way out that involved ending my life. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I hate myself. I hate who I've become. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I stood there watching her cry and felt something twist inside me. Anger, grief, and beneath it all, a tiny, stubborn flicker of hope. Because Harrison had known. He'd known she'd come to this. He'd known she'd break. And he'd written letter 18 not to destroy her, but to force her to see what she'd almost become. Your father gave you a chance, I said softly. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. He could have reported you. He could have written you out of the will entirely, but he didn't. He left you letter 18, and he left you 6 more nights. Mom, You have a choice, Rosalind. You can leave right now, walk out that door, and lose everything, not just the money, but your sisters, your mother, and whatever's left of the person you used to be. I stepped closer, my voice steady. Or you can stay. You can read the last 6 letters. You can face whatever your father wrote. And you can prove to me and to yourself that you're not the person I saw in that email. She stared at me, trembling. I don't deserve this, she whispered. No, I said. You don't, but your father believed you could still be saved, so I'm giving you the same chance he gave you. She stood wiping her eyes. What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Then at least you tried. She nodded slowly, then walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back. Thank you, Mom. I didn't respond, I just watched her leave. The next morning, I came downstairs to find all 5 daughters awake, sitting in the living room. None of them had slept. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at each of them. Night 19, I said. 6 more nights. The morning after night 19, I called Naomi, Celeste, Violet, and Aurelia into the kitchen. Rosalind was still upstairs. I'm letting her stay, I said. Naomi's face went pale. Are you serious? She tried to harm you, Mom. Celeste said, her voice sharp. How can you even— Your father gave her a chance, I interrupted, and so am I. That's insane, Naomi said. What if she tries again? I looked at each of them. Then I suppose that's a risk I'm willing to take. Celeste shook her head. I don't feel safe here. Then leave, I said quietly. The room went silent. They all stared at me. None of them moved. Because leaving meant losing everything. $1 million. Each. And they knew it. I didn't think so, I said. Living with someone you're afraid of is exhausting. Living with someone you're angry at is worse. For the next 5 nights, the house felt like ice. Rosalind stayed in her room most of the day. When she came down for the readings, her sisters wouldn't look at her. They sat as far away from her as possible. At night 20, Violet got up and left the room after Warren opened the envelope. She didn't come back until the reading was over. At night 21, Aurelia refused to sit on the same couch as Rosalind. I watched it all and said nothing, until the tension became unbearable. Your father didn't write 25 letters so you could hate each other, I said one night after the reading. He wrote them so you could heal. Naomi looked at me. She was going to hurt you, Mom. How are we supposed to just forget that? I'm not asking you to forget, I said. I'm asking you to try. On night 21, Warren opened the envelope addressed to Rosalind. Inside was a letter about a case she'd won when she was 23 years old, a single mother fighting for custody of her daughter. Rosalind had worked for free, spent months on the case, and won. Harrison's words were simple. You fought for someone who couldn't fight for herself. I believe you can become that person again. Rosalind cried, and for the first time since letter 18, her sisters didn't look away. On night 22, Warren opened an envelope addressed to me. It was Harrison's final letter to his wife. 52 years of love written in his shaky handwriting. He told me he was proud of me. He told me I'd been the strongest person he'd ever known. He told me he was sorry for leaving. I broke. I sat in that chair and cried in front of my daughters for the first time since the funeral. And one by one, they came to me. All 5 of them, even Rosalind. They held me, and I held them. On night 23, Warren read a letter addressed to Naomi. It was about a high school student she'd once taught coding for free. A kid from a low-income family who couldn't afford classes. Naomi had spent 6 months mentoring him. He'd gone on to get a scholarship to MIT. You used to believe success meant helping others rise, Harrison wrote. When did you forget that? Naomi stared at the letter for a long time. Then she looked at me. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. Then find out, I said. Night 24 ended quietly. No fights, no shouting, just silence. As we stood to go upstairs, Rosalind turned to me. Do you think Dad forgave me? She asked. I looked at her for a long moment. I don't know, I said. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. One more night, one more letter, and I still didn't know if I could forgive her either. The final envelope sat on the coffee table, thin but somehow heavier than all the others combined. It was night 25, 7 o'clock. All 6 of us sat in the living room. Naomi, Rosalind, Celeste, Violet, Aurelia, and me. Warren stood by the fireplace holding the last envelope in his hands. For 24 nights we'd gathered in this room. We'd cried, we'd fought. We'd remembered who we used to be and confronted who we'd become. Tonight was the end. Warren opened the envelope slowly, carefully, and pulled out 2 folded letters. 2 letters, he said quietly. One from your father, one from your mother. He unfolded the first and began to read Harrison's words. If you're reading this, I'm proud of you. Not because you stayed, not because you want the money, but because you listened. For 25 nights, you've heard the truth about yourselves. The good, the bad, the ugly, and you didn't run. But this is only the beginning. Forgiveness isn't something you receive. It's something you earn. Now it's time for your mother to decide. Warren set the letter down and picked up the second. He looked at me. I nodded. He read my words. 25 letters cannot erase 25 years. Words are easy, actions are hard. I'm not forgiving you today, not yet. Go home. Change your lives. Prove to me that these 25 nights meant something. Forgiveness takes time. Show me you deserve it. The room fell silent. Naomi was the first to speak. How long, Mom? As long as it takes, I said. Celeste wiped her eyes. What if we fail? Then you fail, I said, but at least you tried. Rosalind looked at me, her face pale. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I held her gaze for a long moment. I don't know, I said honestly, but I want to. Violet stood and came to me, wrapping her arms around me. Thank you, Mom, for giving us this chance. One by one, the others joined, all 5 of them, holding me, holding each other. And for the first time in years, it felt like a family. The next morning, I stood on the front porch and watched them pack their cars. Naomi was the first to leave. She hugged me tightly before getting into her rental. I'm going to prove it to you, Mom, I promise. Don't promise, I said. Just do it. Rosalind was the last. She stood in the driveway for a long time, staring at the house. Finally, she walked over to me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she said quietly, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. I nodded, then start today. She got into her car and drove away. I stood on that porch and watched all 5 of them disappear down the road back to New York, Chicago, Seattle, Austin, Portland, back to their lives. And I wondered, would they change or would they go back to who they were before? I didn't know, but I'd given them the same thing Harrison had given them, a chance. I walked back inside, closed the door, and looked at the empty living room. 25 envelopes, 25 nights, 25 truths. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if any of it mattered. 6 months, I thought. In 6 months, I'll have my answer. 2 weeks passed after night 25. I heard nothing. No phone calls, no text messages, no emails, just silence. I sat in the empty house in Asheville and wondered if I'd been a fool. Maybe they'd taken their money and forgotten everything. Maybe the 25 nights meant nothing after all. Then in week 3, my phone rang. It was my oldest daughter. Mom, she said, I resigned. Resigned, I repeated, confused. From the company. I'm done being a CEO. I'm going to mentor low-income students who want to learn business, like I used to. I didn't say much. I just listened. In week 4, my second daughter called. Her voice was shaky but determined. I'm in a recovery program, Mom, for gambling, and I'm working as a public defender now. The pay is terrible, but I'm helping people who can't afford lawyers. People like that single mother Dad wrote about. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I'm proud of you, I said, but keep going. In week 5, my third daughter sent an email. She'd reduced her hours at the hospital so she could spend more time with patients. She attached a photo of herself sitting beside an elderly woman's bed, holding her hand. I stared at that photo for a long time. In week 6, my fourth daughter called to tell me she'd closed her high-end design firm. She was starting a nonprofit that designed homes for low-income families. I'm not making much money, she said, but I feel like myself again. In week 7, my youngest sent a handwritten letter. She'd applied to a graduate program in art and started volunteering at an animal shelter. She included a photo of herself with a rescued dog. I kept every message, every photo, every email, but I stayed cautious. Words were easy. I needed to see if they'd keep their promises. Over the next few months, the evidence kept coming. My oldest sent me photos of her students' kids from the Bronx learning coding and finance. One of them had just been accepted to Columbia. My second daughter emailed me updates on her cases. She was exhausted, overworked, underpaid. But she sounded alive in a way she hadn't in years. My third daughter called me one night and told me about a patient she'd stayed late to comfort. I remembered Dad's letter, she said quietly, about the injured bird. I used to care like that. I forgot. You remembered, I said. That's what matters. In month 5, I did something I hadn't planned. I flew to Seattle. I didn't tell my daughter I was coming. I just went to her hospital, sat in the waiting room, and watched. And there she was, sitting beside an elderly man's bed, holding his hand, talking to him softly. She stayed for over an hour, long after her shift ended. I left before she saw me. I cried the whole way back to the airport. When I got home to Asheville, I sat on the front porch and looked out at the Blue Ridge Mountains. The house felt different now, not empty, just quiet. I thought about my husband, about the 25 letters he'd written, about the nights we'd spent together planning this impossible thing. You were right, I whispered to the wind. They're changing. I didn't know if it would last. I didn't know if they'd keep their promises. But for the first time in years, I had hope. My phone buzzed, a text from my youngest. Mom, I got accepted into the graduate program. My first class starts in the fall. Thank you for believing in me. I smiled, wiped my eyes, and texted back, I'm proud of you. Keep going. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new chapter was beginning, and I was ready. 6 months later, I stood at Harrison's grave in the early morning light. The air was cool and quiet. Asheville Cemetery was nearly empty. Just me, the headstone, and the memory of a man who'd loved his family enough to tell them the hardest truths. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. All 5 of them were walking toward me: Naomi, Rosalind, Celeste, Violet, Aurelia. Each of them carried a small bouquet of flowers. They didn't say anything at first. They just stood beside me, placing their flowers at the base of the headstone. White roses, yellow daisies, lavender, sunflowers, blue hydrangeas. Harrison would have liked that. We wanted to be here together, Naomi said softly, to tell him what's changed. I knotted my throat tight. One by one, they spoke. Naomi pulled out a photo from her bag, a picture of 15 students in a classroom, all of them smiling. I'm teaching again, Dad. Kids from the Bronx who want to learn business. One of them just got into Columbia. Rosalind stepped forward next, her voice steadier than I'd heard in years. I won my first case as a public defender last week, a single mother fighting for custody. I didn't get paid much, but I felt like myself again. Celeste folded her hands. I've been spending more time with my patients, really listening to them. Like you used to listen to your students, Dad. Violet smiled through tears. I closed my old firm. I'm designing homes for families who can't afford them. It doesn't pay well, but it feels right. Aurelia was the last. She pulled out a small sketchbook and opened it to a drawing of a dog. I'm volunteering at the animal shelter again, and I'm going back to school for my master's. I'm not pretending anymore, Dad. I'm just me. I looked at each of them, at the women they were becoming. They weren't perfect. They still had debt. They still made mistakes. But they were trying, and that was enough. Your father would have been so proud, I said quietly. Rosalind looked at me, her eyes searching. Are you Mom? I held her gaze for a long moment. I'm getting there, I said honestly, because forgiveness wasn't something you gave all at once. It was something you earned, something you built, day by day, choice by choice. That's all I needed to hear, Rosalind whispered. We stood together in silence, 6 women beside a grave, honoring the man who'd refused to let us stay broken. After a while, they hugged me one by one and began to leave, back to their lives, back to the work of becoming better. I stayed behind. When I was alone, I knelt beside Harrison's headstone and rested my hand on the cool stone. You were right, I whispered. They've changed, maybe not completely, but enough. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it, the grief, the pride, the hope, the exhaustion of the past 6 months, all of it. 25 letters, I said softly. 25 nights. It worked, Harrison. It actually worked. I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked back to my car. The sun was rising over the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, a new beginning. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if my daughters would keep their promises. I didn't know if I'd ever fully forgive Rosalind. But I knew one thing. We'd tried, and sometimes trying is enough. I drove home as the sun climbed higher, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Looking back at everything that happened, I realize I should have acted sooner. Don't be like me. Don't wait until it's almost too late to tell the people you love the truth. These family drama stories taught me that silence can be more destructive than confrontation. Harrison and I spent years watching our daughters drift away, convincing ourselves they'd eventually come back on their own. But God had a different plan. He gave Harrison the strength to write 25 letters, even when his hands could barely hold a pen. The lesson here is simple love sometimes means telling hard truths. In all the grandma stories I've heard over the years, the ones that mattered most were about families who fought for each other, not with fists, but with honesty. These family drama stories remind us that real change requires courage, not comfort. God doesn't promise us perfect children or easy forgiveness. He promises us the strength to try, and that's exactly what those 25 nights gave us. My personal belief: forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey you walk every single day. Whether you're living your own family drama stories or listening to grandma stories passed down through generations, remember this change is possible. But only if we're willing to face uncomfortable truths. The grandma stories that matter most aren't about perfection, they're about persistence. God blessed me with 5 daughters who came back. Not because they were perfect, but because they were willing to listen. So here's my advice: don't wait for a crisis to speak your truth. Love boldly. Forgive slowly, and trust that God's timing is always better than ours. A final note: this content contains dramatized storytelling elements for educational purposes. Some details are fictionalized, but the lessons and messages are entirely valuable. If this style doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. Please seek content that better suits your needs.